everybody, welcome back to my channel. It is almost February, if you can believe it, which means that it is almost time for Febregency, which is one of my favorite reading events that takes place here on BookTube. It's where we read and appreciate literature that was written, published in the Regency era. So the Febregency reading event is hosted by 4 co-hosts: Tiffany, Christy, Stephanie, and Dia. I will put everybody's information down in the description box so you can check out their announcement videos and then, get all the details about joining the reading event. The broad time span for that era would be 1795 to 1837. However, the technical time span would have been 1811 to 1820. For the purposes of this video, we are going to broaden things out. So 1795 to 1837, including all of 1837 for purposes that will be revealed in a little while. So tonight I want to share with you guys 10 recommendations for Regency era Regency era works that are not written by Jane Austen. So Jane Austen's fabulous. She's one of my very favorite writers. However, that's usually what everybody thinks of when they think of the Regency, and there's actually quite a bit more to it. So these are 10 recommendations that are not written by Jane Austen. And then I'm also going to share with you guys a few books that I'm thinking about reading for Febregency. Also, new reads that I have not read before, and even a couple of new authors. So let me get into all of it because I got a lot. So the first book to recommend would be A Simple Story by Elizabeth Inchbald. This story was published in 1791, and I read this in July for Jane Austen July, and I liked it okay. It was a groundbreaking novel for the time, for sure. So if you are interested in just kind of inserting yourself into that era and what would have really turned the heads and wiggled the tongues of the people, this is one of them. One of the main themes of the story is what constitutes a woman's proper education and, makes her fit for society, sort of a thing. There is a young girl with a guardian, and the guardian does his best to sort of keep her in line. However, she has ideas of her own, and the story just kind of, it just goes from there. There's not a lot to it. It's a simple story, but it's a good story, and I recommend it. If you end up liking Mrs. Inchbald, or you want to try her out, but you don't want to commit to a whole novel, you could read Lover's Vows, which is her play from 1798. It is hilarious, especially the butler. It's just a simple, short little play, but it's really funny. It's really good. And this version that I got has this gigantic print on it. So if you're like me and you need glasses but absolutely despise wearing them, I would highly recommend that you order this copy because it's massive. All right, so next up, if you wanted to, you could check out some of the works of Mary Shelley. So most popularly Frankenstein, right? Got that one right here and have read it several times. The first time that I read Frankenstein, wasn't a fan, but it's growing on me. You could also read her story called The Last Man, which is a book basically about the last human on Earth. And it starts out with lots of humans on Earth, and it just kind of dwindles down to none. This book itself could have been dwindled down quite a bit. So like many works of the time, it is super wordy and quite a bit longer than it needs to be, but still a really interesting story and interesting concept, right, for the day. Although Mary Shelley isn't super imaginative in all of the, apocalyptic and post-apocalyptic ideas, it does get your mind going of other things she could have included, but she does include a couple of things along those, sci-fi lines way earlier than a lot of people were. It's definitely a unique novel for the time, and definitely worth the read, I thought. And also, if you read a little of her biographical information, you can really match up themes between how she was feeling very alone at the death of her husband and most of their friends either dead or not associated anymore, and this person who is really just the last man on the earth. She was kind of feeling like she was the last person left of her group, of her friend group, right? And just feeling melancholy and a bit desolate. And so the themes really match up well biographically for her, but you can check that out. But thirdly, you could read something that isn't quite as known as these other two, and I've actually never heard anyone talk about this book, and that is Maurice, or The Fisher's Cot by Mary Shelley. Now, one of the reasons why this book is not as well known as it was only discovered in 1997 in Italy. So people were going through totally TV story, right? So people were going through some old, collections of papers and books and things, and they found a book bound with cloth, I think, and in just an old book, sort of hand bound with cloth and, just simple way. And inside of it, it was dedicated to a little girl by Mrs. Shelley. And the little girl was a friend of the family, and she had actually written the story in 1820. So 6 years before The Last Man, which was published in 1826, and just a couple of years after Frankenstein, which the first version was from 1816. Mary Shelley wrote this story at a time when she was very depressed. She had married Percy, and they had 4 children, 3 of whom had passed away. And sort of that melancholy spirit pours over into this novel, which starts off with a funeral and then is about an orphaned boy and then his benefactor. And it takes place on Torquay, which is very interesting because if you've read Elizabeth Gouge's book, Gentian Hill, which was published way later. Yeah, that was published in 1949. Gentian Hill really tells a very similar story about someone who is orphaned, who has a benefactor. Even the great big mystery is eerily similar. Both stories take place on Torquay. So if it hadn't been an established fact that this book was found in 1997, I would almost think that Elizabeth Gouge had made a retelling of this story. They were so similar. And weirdly enough, a few years ago when I did read the story, I had just finished reading Gentian Hill and had no idea that they were similar stories. So the whole thing was just really weird. But anyway, if you do choose this book, there's a certain way in which I believe is best to read it. So this book has a lot of commentary in it by Claire Tomalin. She tells the story of the finding of the book and all that in the 90s. So I have it written down how I read through this. So I read the first few pages up to page 13, where there starts to be spoilers to the actual story of Maurice, or The Fisher's Cot. Then I skipped ahead to the author's original version and read the story. So this book actually features the author's original version, and then the second version is kind of a modernized, where all the edits are made and everything is fixed, spelling and modernization, basically. So I actually wanted to read the original version, and so that's what I read. And then I went back and I finished Claire Tomalin's commentary from pages 13 to 65. And then I went and read the poem that was dedicated to Percy at the end on pages 155 to 59. So I really did hop around a lot in the book, but like I said, there is lots of introduction and sort of just scene setting, the biographical stuff written by Claire Tomalin. There are 2 versions of the story written by Mary Shelley, and then a poem to Percy at the end. This is a fantastic find. Someone sent this to me years ago and was just try this. She had heard I didn't like Frankenstein, and she's try this, and I did, and I loved it. And then, like I said, over the years, Frankenstein, I'm starting to come around. All right, and then next up there is this collection of stories by Washington Irving. So he was the author of stories like Rip Van Winkle and Sleepy Hollow, which were published in 1819 and 1820. So not all of his stories fall within the era of the Regency time, but those 2 do. So you could read his 2 most popular stories and be reading within that era with Washington Irving. All right, now if you would like to read something that is quite historic to the Gothic era of literature and something that really made a huge impact on a lot of writers afterward, that would be The Castle of Otranto by Horace Walpole. Now you want to read the second edition if you're going to fit this into Febregency, because the first one was published in the 1760s or something, but the second edition was published in 1811. And it's just that he did some revisions and stuff, and it's revised by him, so still his work, but just the cover art should tell you the vibe of this book. So when he first published it, he made it out to be something that he had found that was actually a medieval story that was actually published like in the 1590s or something. And, you know, he made it sound like it was a tale and a legend that was known and was real and whatever. And from what I understand, the Castle of Otranto, I think I looked it up one time and I think it really is a place. But when he came out with the second version, he said, this is a Gothic tale. And from then on, the genre of Gothic literature was supposedly born after that. And while we do see Gothic works by people like Anne Radcliffe published before this 1811 date, she published that in 1794, and he published the first version of The Castle of Otranto in 1764. So it's very possible that he's right. Maybe he really was the very first Gothic fiction writer. The story features a father who is kind of mean, kind of evil, and a young daughter who is under his control, and a host of other characters, a young man, a gigantic head, quite a few crazy, weird things. And when you get all done, it's not super believable, but you had a really great time. It's not a very long book. In fact, my copy here is 106 pages, so I would recommend give this one a try. It is a super fun read, and you can say that you read the very first Gothic novel. If you're interested in reading what children would have been reading during the Regency time, you could pick up Tales from Shakespeare by Charles and Mary Lamb. This collection was written and published in 1807, and it features the rewriting of Shakespeare's story in a way that children can understand. I have read some of these to my children in the past. It is a fun book to go through, and it gives you a good introduction to the stories. If you do feel like Shakespeare is overwhelming, try looking for this version, Tales from Shakespeare. This copy that I have is pretty old. I don't see a publication date inside of it, but it was given to Dick from his Aunt Violet in 1929. So there's that. And then if you're looking for some poetry from the Regency time, I've got two for you to round out my 10. First would be William Blake. This little collection is called Songs of Innocence, Songs of Experience. The first half of it are like happy little naive, innocent poems, and the second half are after you've gone through some stuff and lived your life a little bit and you're 46. That kind of poem. I really love this little poem book. I have read from it quite a bit over the years. So these are things that they would have been reading at the beginning of the Regency time. He published Songs of Innocence in 1789 and Songs of Experience in 1794. All right, and then finally for my 10, we've got the collection of Robert Burns's poetry. And this would be actually perfect if you want to get started a little early on Febregency, because Burns Night is actually Sunday night. It is the celebration of the works of Robert Burns because that is his birthday. My collection is super old, having been first gifted to someone in 1900. This is what the opening pages look like. So there's a portrait of him, and then that's the first page there, the info page. And I just think this copy is so beautiful. I found it at an antique shop one time for just like $4 or something. And then the poem I most recently read was To a Mouse, because I was reading Of Mice and Men, and so I wanted to like read the poem, you know, that the story title is based on. But anyway, you can check out Robert Burns as well. So that is 10 Regency era recommendations that you can read. And then I wanted to share with you guys 3 books that I'm thinking about reading in February for Febregency. The first one is something that I've really been looking forward to reading. I purchased this back in July, and this is The Letters of Mrs. Lefroy, Jane Austen's beloved friend. So this is a collection of letters that were written between 1800 and 1804, and while they weren't technically published, they were written in the Regency era, in the land of the Regency. by one of Jane Austen's good friends, Anne Lefroy. So these are her collected letters, and when I was in England in June, I was able to see an exhibit at Winchester Cathedral that was all about Jane Austen and her friendship with Anne Lefroy. There was actually a letter that was displayed that I got to see in Jane's own handwriting, and it was actually not a letter, it was a poem that she had written about Anne Lefroy on her birthday. Anne had died a few years earlier, and Jane was missing her, and she wrote a poem. She probably had a little bit of a bittersweet birthday every year after that happened, but anyway, the exhibit was all about that and their friendship, and it talked a lot about Anne and her family and just the impact that she made on society. She, by herself, inoculated like 500 people in her village against smallpox, I believe it is. She made impacts in the area of medicine and teaching. It seems that she was a really great role model for Jane Austen. And so this is just a collection of Anne's letters. I will not read this whole thing. I know I won't, because I can only do a few at a time when it comes to reading letters, books, or collections of letters or collections of poetry. I really just got to read a couple and then sort of sit on them. But I had purchased this and it was one of kind of my bigger purchases in Jane Austen July. I think by the time I paid shipping, I paid almost $40 for this book. So I have been waiting to read this. It was published by the Jane Austen Society in England, edited by Helen Lefroy, who is a descendant of Anne and is known for writing biographies of Jane. I think she's at the time she edited this, she was the vice president of the Jane Austen Society there in England, and then also edited by Gavin Turner, who was also a member of the Jane Austen Society there. So it is actually published by the Jane Austen Society. It was published in 2007. There's not a whole lot of people who are interested in reading the obscure letters of an somewhat obscure Regency era woman, but I'm interested, so I'm thinking about looking into some of those. All right, and then secondly, I am planning on continuing on in the Pickwick Papers. So the Pickwick Papers is actually Charles Dickens' only Regency era book. It was published in 1836 and 37, so he snuck in right there at the end. And so I'm planning on reading at least a little bit more in this, just for the sake of knocking this one off my 50 by 50. I'm enjoying it okay. Again, it's little stories. It's not a flowing, story of with one plot and one, purpose. It's just kind of a bunch of little, I don't know, sketches in the lives of this group of guys. So I'm not really loving it, but I don't hate it either. So I'll read a little bit from that. But the novel that I'm thinking about reading is Evelina by Frances Burney. I've never read anything by Frances Burney. And so this one is on my 50 by 50 also. And I think I'm going to enjoy it. It looks like it's just kind of a coming of age story about a young girl. I mean, I didn't want to read too much about it because I don't, want to get the whole idea here. But just from what I read kind of makes it sound like it's sort of like a Jane Austen novel, right? Where you've got a young girl and the trials and tribulations of growing up and the people around her that drive her nuts in the village and all this stuff. And apparently it's supposed to be funny, and we know that she was an influence on Jane Austen, so I might like it. So I'm considering reading that. If I read a novel for Febregency, this will be the one. But I just wanted to come on and share those recommendations with you guys, some of my favorites from this time period. Let me know if you guys have some favorites that you want to share with me, and also if you've read any of these, what you think of them. Hope you're having a great day, guys. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.